Hello everybody, now we are working but there's only one viewer. If you give us a moment we'll try and link to more. Terribly sorry at how long this is taking. Don't quite understand what's gone wrong.
Well, for that person who has stayed with us, thank you. Hopefully we'll get organised in a minute. And somebody's asked a question, so I'll answer that as we're waiting for you to get going.
We have at least one person.
And the question is, any chance for a future course that would cover up dogs and cats' behaviour more in depth? Actually, we were just talking about this. We had our meeting, which was our wrap-up meeting today. I don't know why my eyes are slipping off to that side. Do you see that? It's a bit odd, isn't it?
I think that's...
Is that because
it's
that
like a mirror reflection, isn't it?
Yes.
It's not quite right. How strange.
Oh.
We're using a new computer, so it's all gone a bit...
This is amazing. Yes, we'd love to do lots more about dogs, cats, horses and other farm animals' behaviour in a lot more detail. Now we have no viewers, so I'm not sure really whether we're getting anywhere with this.
Oh no. Oh dear, hold on.
You said no, we've got two viewers back.
Hello, two viewers.
Two viewers. So the question was, is there any chance for a future course that will cover up dogs and cats and behaviour and so on in more depth? And yes, we would love to be able to provide a lot more in-depth instruction and discussion about normal, abnormal and problem behaviours, and certainly that's an area of interest for us all. I think the problem is just that these MOOCs take an awful lot of effort and time for us to make, and that there's a limited amount of space and time available within the weeks, the 5 weeks of the course to include absolutely everything that we would like to include. So we have had a discussion recently about whether we can add a bit more in, and we will try to do that. Certainly we've taken on board your interest in having a bit more about the companion animal side of things, and we'll try and do a little bit more. I think the big issue is just you know, how far we will take this. What we have decided, however, is that we recognise that there's a bit of a shortage of these short courses, online short courses, and we will certainly add that to the mix when it comes to thinking about new educational programmes that we'll be putting together for the Jean Marchig Animal Welfare Centre. And so if you're interested in the CPD, the Continuing Professional Development, then we have a site on the University of Edinburgh's DICVET website that will tell you a little bit more about some of the upcoming courses that we have. And we used to have quite an in-depth companion animal behaviour and welfare short course that you could buy from us on a CD, and we're just in the process of starting to put that together as an online program. It will cost a little bit of money. We'll try and keep it as cheap as we possibly can, but certainly if we can, you know, if we can earn a little bit of money from some of these things, it does mean that we can then pay people like Jill to put them together for us, because most of us have very full-on, full-time day jobs, and some of this work we're doing obviously because we're very passionate about it, but we're doing it outside of our day job. Okay, well we seem to be going up in terms of numbers and viewers, which is absolutely fabulous.
Just trying to post to Coursera and let people know. I'm not ignoring you, I promise.
I'm really going to apologise for the fact that I look like I'm looking left. As far as I'm concerned, I'm looking straight ahead.
It's really strange, isn't it?
I don't know what's going on.
Yeah. All of our many technical problems today.
I know, we were doing so well up until now.
I know, I'm so annoyed.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm now looking at my little book here that's of questions, and these are great questions that have been posed on the discussion website and discussion forums. And I'm going to pick up on some of these questions and see if I can get through them and try and answer some of them. And it'd be great, as we're going along, if you guys could start asking questions or putting forward comments so that we can pick those up on our screen, because this is really the last time that we're going to have this sort of hangout for this particular round. Okay, so there was a nice question that came through that was about stereotypic behaviour, and the whole question really was, I think, hanging around the issue of how useful stereotypies are for evaluating an animal's welfare, particularly because we know that animals, when you look at them, you're only getting a sort of snapshot of what is going on for them at that particular time. And a stereotypic behaviour may well have been formed earlier, and what you might be left with is a sort of behavioural scar, something that is no longer really linked with the particular problem that that animal might have been facing when that behaviour initially occurred. So I think the question is a very, very good one.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I think it also sort of shows that they were thinking very much about how the behaviour relates to the stress of an animal, which is, you know, great for us that you're picking up on that.
And it is, I mean, the fact is that you cannot take any, as I think we've made this point a number of times, you can't take any of these measures of behaviour or physiology or indeed immunology and production in isolation. That in looking at a captive wild animal, for example, which is I think where this comes up most regularly, you can't just say because the animal is performing a stereotypic behaviour that animal's welfare is very poor. And there are certainly many examples of animals within these confined enclosures that have already developed those behaviours, perhaps before they were even put into the enclosure that they're in.
Yeah.
And I know for some zoos that is actually a considerable embarrassment, because they believe that, you know, obviously the public are much better educated about the meaning of these behaviours and what these behaviours might signify, and they, you know, are very quick to condemn the zoos for providing inadequate facilities for those animals. However, the fact is that just because the animal is performing a stereotypic behaviour doesn't mean that that is an animal that is necessarily suffering. And in order for us to know more about what's going on for that animal, we do need to look at much more about its behaviour, how it spends its day, and also you know, the sorts of things that it's not doing that it should be doing, because it's obviously performing so much, or spending so much time stereotyping, and perhaps even some measures of its physiology. So in captive wild animals, there's a considerable amount of research that's been done to look at hormones using feces, urine, and saliva, where those animals can be positively reinforced for presenting themselves, for opening their mouth to get a saliva sample. So there's a need really to look at a range of measures, look at the animal across, you know, sort of its lifetime rather than just at that particular time, and recognise that sometimes stereotypic behaviour alone is not actually the best way of assessing the animal's welfare. It's an indicator, but it's not the only indication that needs to be looked at. So I hope that helps with the stereotypic behaviour question. Are we all on track now?
Yes, I'm really sorry. I've updated. There's now links on Coursera and on the Google Places, so hopefully you'll all we are going up in numbers. I'm so sorry. And do let us know if you can't hear us. As I say, we've got a new computer, but I have noticed somebody's saying that, Nat, you have a lovely speaking voice.
Oh, wonderful. Does that mean you can't see me then?
No, I think they can see you as well.
Okay. Right. Okay, then.
Goodness.
So another question.
Yeah. Well,
so yes.
I really liked this question in the forums, but I wonder if this is one we maybe want to leave till a little bit towards the end, or should we just go for it now?
Yeah, I think we should do that towards the end.
Yeah.
Because I think it rounds up, doesn't it? Yes.
Yeah.
There's a couple of other ones. I think it was a good one on dangerous dogs and the legislation.
Oh, yeah,
so
I like this one.
Who is this? Chris Canada.
Chris Canada.
Yeah. So Chris, I think you've got a very important point here, and it's certainly something that a lot of the people in the UK, when they're talking about the impact of the dangerous dogs legislation on dog welfare, they have quite a lot to say about this. And certainly, I think one of the problems is that in trying to generalise and trying to protect people, and other dogs from so-called dangerous dogs, and try to control breeding and so on, and manage some of the safety issues. It has meant that many dogs, if they appear in the public and they're not muzzled, they're not licensed and so on, that they are then confiscated and lifted, and court cases often are pending where these dogs are then kept in kennels for long periods of time, waiting to see what the outcome of that court case might be. And there are welfare issues, as has already been pointed out during the companion animal week, with any animal, whether the shelter is a brilliant shelter or not, with any animal being kept confined in a shelter situation for a long period of time. Absolutely. And so, from the point of view of the dog, it has been removed from its environment where it's it's got people that it knows, and placed in a situation where it is unable to perform all of its natural behaviour, and it is normally very stressed. We know from research that dogs, particularly in the first 7 to 10 days of being in a kennel situation, are very stressed. Yeah. So there are welfare issues associated with the dangerous dogs legislation in relation to what happens to those dogs that are confiscated.
Yeah, but I suppose, so Chris Kennedy was also asking about pit bulls, and specifically pit bulls. I think it's one of the things that I find very interesting, because I'm interested in personality and temperament research, is if you look at, say, the American Kennel Club definition of breeds, most of the breeds will have something like lovely temperament or well-tempered animal, wonderful family dog is quite often seen. They're very positive descriptions, and even when the descriptions are something which a cynical person might think is more negative, they're usually phrased in the terms of a good guarding dog, or very loyal to its own owners. And I think that's quite interesting, because it again shows the way that we perceive these breeds and the way that the expectations that we put on these different breeds. And I personally would not try to judge a dog by its breed, because of the huge amount of individual variation that any individual animal can have because of its own experiences, and the genetic makeup of that animal is only a small component of its overall behaviour. And
somebody said this quite nicely on the discussion forums when there was a discussion going on, and I think they said something like, it's not the breed, it's the deed. And I think that's quite true. Yes, there are certain dogs that are have the potential to be more dangerous because they have a bigger bite and they have stronger jaws, and they have a breed disposition that might lend themselves to being more reactive, more aggressive. But to take the individual dog that's never done anything to hurt anybody, and that's been well managed and has very responsible owners, and have to impose a general piece of legislation on it is obviously problematic. But it is done with the best intent, and sadly there are some owners who are not very responsible.
And I think that's the crux of the legislation, really, is trying to get at these irresponsible owners more than the dogs themselves. But, it's a tricky one. I did notice as well, somebody else was talking about the yellow ribbon movement. Have you heard of this, Nat? Where they put
tie a yellow ribbon around the old oak tree or something.
So it's tying a yellow ribbon or using a yellow harness to indicate that a dog is likely to act aggressive if approached. And I've seen a few people mention it, and I saw it come up in the forums as well. And it's one of the things that I think is, I respect what they're trying to do. But for example, I was at a demonstration at the Royal Highland Show actually just a couple of weeks ago, and somebody brought into the demonstration a dog that had a yellow ribbon tied around its lead, and I went, oh, that dog must be aggressive. And then this beautiful, friendly, happy dog ran about, and it actually just happened to have a yellow ribbon because the owner didn't know what it meant. So these kind of things are great if everybody knows what it means, and that can be quite difficult, I think, as well. So
I think there's also a potential problem with it, because I think if you could be proven to know that your dog was likely to behave aggressively, and therefore and then it goes ahead and behaves aggressively, you couldn't then claim that I didn't know that my dog was aggressive, even though it's never behaved aggressively before.
I think in British law that would be a problem. problematic for you as well.
And we have the same sort of way of indicating a potential problem with horses. The tradition is to tie a little red ribbon on the horse's tail, and that's supposed to show that this horse is likely to kick and therefore keep away from it. I think personally that if you basically just educate people about the fact that all horses kick, especially when they feel threatened, then we can avoid some of these things.
Likewise, all dogs will bite if given the right stimulus.
Exactly. And I think it's basically the unrealistic expectations of pet owners that can often be a problem.
Yeah.
So yes, now what else have we got? We had some really interesting questions about, there's a lot of people asking about zoo animals actually, so we'll pick up another one which was looking at the appropriateness of keeping certain animals in zoos, particularly in relation to climate.
Yeah.
And there was discussion about this polar bear, and I think there was a link put in for those who want to learn more about, is it Arteus? Anyway, I think it's the whole question of appropriateness of animals for particular climates. It's not just exclusive to zoos actually, because if you think about some of the dog breeds that we have that might well be kept in different climates, I'm thinking particularly about these very woolly breeds, you know.
Do you know, funnily enough, when I was in Taiwan just 2 weeks ago, I visited a few dog shelters there, and there were a lot of husky types, and well, I was too hot, and I don't have a double layer of hair,
so you know, and you get the same with actually different production animals now as well. So there's a lot of people, you know, in places like India are very keen to bring different breeds into India that might well be very good at producing lots of milk, for example. So cow breeds, dairy cow breeds. And the problem with that is some of them are actually not well suited to the particular climate that they'll be kept in, so they have additional welfare issues associated with just being, you know, not well adapted to live in particular climates. But getting back to the polar bear issue, I think with polar bears, they are particularly susceptible to having problems within any confined or restricted environment, and that's because of their nature. They are animals that live, you know, in an area that enables them to roam very widely, hunting for food, and they have very, very strong motivations to hunt and move and range. They have large ranges. And the problem with that is that where you've got animals that have very, very strong motivations for particular behaviours, then they are more likely to become frustrated when they are not able to perform those particular, you might say, almost hardwired behaviours. And you see this very often in production animals as well. And I know that there's been, you know, during week 4, when Susan Jarvis was talking about pigs and some of the problems that pigs on pig farms have with being confined, and some of the behaviours that the repetitive stereotypic behaviours that they show. This is because pigs are extremely motivated to root around and to search for food, and so they have this normal food getting behaviour. So just providing them with the end product, which is the food, the goal of the behaviour, actually is not enough to satisfy their motivation for food, because they need to be able to perform the natural food getting behaviour as well as actually get the goal. And that's the same with polar bears. They are, you know, highly motivated to show a food getting behaviour. And then to have their food delivered to them after that. So just giving them food isn't enough. And you then have the issue about climate and whether or not you can provide them with an adequate environment that enables them to cool down when they want to and to be comfortable. And I mean, you know, if you think about it, it is possible to do that. Humans live in air conditioning and you know, dip in cold water and all that sort of thing in a hot environment. I think, and I have seen polar bears kept in, for example, in Australia on the Gold Coast, in a big facility there. A lot of money had been spent on it, and those polar bears were able to perform quite a range of their behaviours. So it's possible to do that, but then you do wonder why you would, given that these animals, you know, at the end of the day, are better suited to living in the cooler environments that they have adapted to live in.
Again, coming back to the cost-benefit analysis that we talked about, you know, as a culture, we have to decide what do we want to impose upon these animals, and how much can we provide them.
Well, it's quite an interesting one, because you have to be very careful about, you know, recognising the difference between your ethical stance and the welfare issues for those animals. So regardless of whether or not you agree with zoos, you can still have a discussion about what are the welfare issues for those particular species that are kept in zoos. And you will have noticed, and I know this has been a little bit frustrating for some people as they have gone through this course, that we have been very careful about avoiding the kind of ethical questions in relation to a stance on particular things. You know, we have probably taken quite a utilitarian view of animals, which is actually the way that animal welfare science is. Animal welfare scientists will accept that animals are used for food, and you know, and are kept in zoos and so on, and they then will go. They will then use that as the basis for why they're interested in looking at their welfare. That doesn't mean, and I have to be honest about this, it doesn't mean that individually we agree or we don't agree with these things. We all have our own personal points of view, and in our office of the group of us, we differ in our ethical opinions. We differ in our lifestyle choices. We differ in our diet preferences. We differ in our particular passions, and that's something that we respect about each other. But that doesn't mean that we can't work together to try to improve those things that we feel we can comment well on, and use an evidence base for providing good information and good ways forward for actually improving things. If you don't engage with the argument because you feel that, you know, we shouldn't be doing anything with animals, using them or having anything to do with them, then really you cannot then help to improve the welfare of those animals that are actually living in those systems.
And I think this kind of leads on to a question which was left in the forums by Philippa Robinson, who asks, to what extent do you feel animal welfare is independent of political and cultural influence? She asked, am I being unfair to feel that animal welfare science is simply improving welfare within an existing system rather than challenging it altogether? And I think, yes, you are being a little bit unfair there, because what we do as animal welfare scientists is provide the best evidence on a range of questions, such as, are animals sentient? And we have shown that yes, they are. I think if you remember back in the week 1 hangout we had, I can't remember who it was that asked, but somebody was really impressed to see that sentience was now accepted. And that has only happened because animal welfare science has investigated that question thoroughly, and now it's a fairly accepted fact. It's in EU legislation. And from there, you can change the systems, but you can't change the systems without having the evidence behind it to back it up. And you have to do that, you know, by sort of engaging in the overall debate, as Nat was saying. So
yeah, but you know, I've got some sympathy for Philippa, because I hope you are here, Philippa. I don't know whether you are. You asked a question, so hopefully you'll look at this at some point. I do actually worry a little bit about political agendas, and one of the reasons is when you think about how research questions and research is funded. Because there are lots and lots of very interesting things that we would love to be able to have the answers to, but unless they are actually important enough to get onto the political agenda, then the chances are they're not going to get funded.
Yeah, I agree with that, actually, yeah.
So, you know, I think you have to recognise and be realistic about the fact that a lot of the big money, a lot of the big research money comes from organisations that are government funded, whether that's in the UK, the US, or wherever. And the independent money, if you like, is the animal welfare organisations or the trusts, very wealthy individuals who've got a particular agenda as well. And so most of the research and the questions that we end up answering are questions that somebody has a vested interest in.
Yeah, that's true.
Knowing.
That is true.
So I think you've got a very important point. I think we have to be very realistic about the fact that, you know, the research that we do, the answers that we have, you know, they're driven by particular questions that are politically important, whether that's politically from a government point of view, an international perspective, or whether that's politically in terms of somebody else's agenda who's got a particular passion for something. And so you could then say that, is animal welfare research ever really independent?
Yeah, but I suppose maybe I'm getting a little bit philosophical, but is anything truly independent of politics and culture? I mean, is human welfare independent of politics and culture? And the kind of medical research that we do, that depends on the funding bodies and on what a particular government sees as being important.
No, I mean, I think it's a very important philosophical point.
Yeah, very philosophical, possibly not for this.
But I think it's an important point to raise, that it's not as, you know, we perhaps don't go as far as we would like to go, and we perhaps could understand an awful lot more about what's important to animals. If there was a real desire to totally understand things from the animal's point of view. Yeah,
I think actually we're kind of beginning to let people know that actually there's a lot more research that could be done. You have to think about animal welfare as a science, and that's, you know, something I natter on about quite a lot, that if people were to understand just how much of animal welfare we still don't know about, there might be some more funding involved.
Yes, just for the sake of doing it rather than because it answers a question that's important to somebody else. I think that's important. So yes, thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, it's a good question, Philippa.
Very good question. What else have we got here?
Well, we could answer some of these ones as well.
Oh, right, yes. Yeah, let's have a look at some of the ones that people have raised. There's a question here from Tamsin Stone. Hi, Tamsin. Very good point, especially given that it's sort of holiday-ish season, depending on where you are in the world. And I think this one's, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, let's face it, you are going on holiday and you want to have a nice time and you want to pick the best boarding, kennel, cattery, stables that you possibly can for your animal, but the reality is that you are putting that animal into a situation that is, you know, unfamiliar. And even if it's familiar because they've been there before, it's still an adjustment for them, and anything like that is going to be stressful. Obviously, there are degrees of stressfulness for animals. I mean, I know there are some people who say, oh, my dog loves going to the kennel because normally he's on his own at home, and when he goes to the kennel, he gets to play with other dogs, and there's lots of nice smells, and there's you know, there's a routine that he doesn't get at home, and there's people around and so on. So I think, you know, there's some positives that can come from well-adjusted dogs going to well-managed shelters that they've been to previously and had a good experience. But you know, that sort of period of time where the animals are adjusting is a stressful time. Don't forget that when we talked about stress, we talk about it as being it's basically the way that the animal copes with the situation that it's in. If the animal becomes stressed beyond its ability to cope, that's when you start to get longer-term chronic stress situations, and then you can get a breakdown of the animal's ability to, you know, to cope with all sorts of things, and obviously that affects its immune system. It becomes sick and so on. So, you know, I think being stressed is not pleasant initially if it's a negative experience, but it's something that the animal can overcome. And so I don't want to say that people shouldn't send their dogs to boarding kennels, but you do have to recognise that it's not exactly the most pleasant experience for most animals in the time that they have to adjust. But it may well be that they adjust quickly and then just
listen to your own individual pet. I mean, I've had dogs who were reasonably okay with the kenneling, and I've had dogs who hated kenneling, absolutely hated it, and where possible we found alternative methods. So listen to your own animal.
There was a question that was about, now where is it here? Yeah, there was a question about from Temple Grandin, about Temple Grandin. I can't remember. It was an anonymous one. This person called Anonymous, and it was about restraint the Temple Grandin, if you've ever watched the film about her life and her work, there's a part of the film that talks about how she copes with her autism, and she had developed a special squeeze box or a squeeze machine that she felt sort of gave her a feeling of being reassured and reduced her stress levels when everything around her was chaotic and she felt out of control. And so there's a nice question actually about whether this kind of squeeze machine could be, something like that could be used on animals, particularly companion animals, if they were stressed. And I think actually they talked about a sort of pressure bandage that could be used to help.
Could pressure wraps be used in shelters with very stressed dogs to ease their anxiety?
And would
they work on cats?
Well, look, I have no knowledge of this, so I can't possibly comment on whether or not a pressure bandage or a restraint machine actually does reduce the stress for companion animals. And I think it certainly would be a piece of research that would have to be approached very carefully, because it may well reduce stress, but it may well actually increase stress.
Yeah.
Because equally, the point about Temple Grandin was that she chose to go into that squeeze machine, and she could choose when to finish being in that squeeze machine. Whereas anything that you do to animals, that you impose upon them, takes away very often their ability to control their own environment. Yeah. I think what the better way of dealing with this is to recognise what those animals try to do to reduce their stress levels and give them the opportunity to do those things. So, for example, for cats in catteries, research has shown that if you provide them with a hide area, it could be just a cardboard box in the cage, that those cats will choose to use that hide. And those cats that have a hide area and have chosen to use those hides have a reduced stress level as compared with cats that don't have the ability to show escape responses. Yeah. So it all comes down to what is called controllability and predictability. These are two very important aspects for any animal. The ability to control the situation, perform behaviours that they need to perform in order to take back control, and also predict something. Animals like to know what's going to happen. They don't really, there's a sort of, we talk about it as fear of the unknown in humans, and it's the same with animals. If they don't know what's going to happen, if they don't have, kind of predictability in their environment, that in itself can be very stressful. However, it's quite an interesting one, because we also talk about the importance of variation and variability and not having a sort of environment where nothing ever changes and nothing ever happens, because that can lead animals, certain species, to be incredibly frustrated because they're seeking some sort of stimulation, and then they acquire all sorts of behaviours in order to almost self-stimulate. So it's a balance. It depends on the species, but I think recognising that being able to control things for animals is a way of de-stressing them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, this is interesting. Could be a good master's project or a PhD
it could
project
indeed. It was a very interesting question, actually, I thought. What else have we got here then?
So
we've done
that
one,
haven't we?
What is this one? A follow-up. So we've got a follow-up question from Dina.
Here we go.
As a follow-up, how can one then assess a dog in kennels within the 7 to 10 days that a dog has before it is euthanized?
Wow, interesting question.
Normally, so let's just think about it. Why has the dog got this 7 to 10 day period? Well, normally it's in order to make sure that that dog is, if it has a home or not. In fact, actually at the weekend, my husband, who's very good at suddenly finding animals on the road or in fields and rescuing them, he and my son were coming back from having fed somebody else's pet because they were away on holiday and they didn't want to send their pet to a kennel. So it's all fitting in nicely, isn't it? And they found a dog sadly wandering around on a country road, and it had been hit by a car and had a lot of blood pouring from its mouth. So it was in a bit of distress. Fortunately, didn't look like it was too badly injured. And So they picked up this dog, and we phoned the police, which is what you do in the UK if you find a dog without a collar and no identity and no owner. And the police came and picked up the dog from our house, took it to the vet, and then told us that if somebody hadn't come along to, say that they'd lost this dog, that the dog would be taken to a local dog and cat home, a pound basically, a local authority-run place, and then would obviously wait there to find out if the owners came to reclaim it. So for those dogs that do end up in that, in a kennel situation, they're normally dogs that have been picked up off the street and are waiting to find out if their owners are going to claim them. And it would be a very, very stressful time for them, not just going into a new environment, but they also have been dogs that have potentially had quite a stressful experience anyway, have found themselves wandering around on the road or whatever. And I think it is very difficult then to make any kind of assessment of the real dog during that period of time, because what you're seeing is a dog that is stressed and trying to cope with its environment. So that's that being said, if this dog was coming in for rehoming, so it's a dog that was given a period of time and quarantined potentially, and then after the 7 to 10 day period was decided that it was healthy, physically healthy, it would then go through a behavioural assessment in a responsible kennel situation. So nobody would in their right mind be thinking about doing a behavioural assessment on a dog during that first week. However, that being said, if a dog was coming in for rehoming, so it wasn't a stray dog, it was one that had been given up, and it showed extreme aggressive behaviour during that first week, that made it extremely dangerous to be around, then it would be very difficult to persuade a kennel that has an awful lot of animals there that this is a safe dog for rehoming. So it's a good question, Dina.
It is a good question. And I suppose you also have to make sure that these dogs, when they're coming in and they're very stressed, that they have as many different options to cope with their stressful environment in as many different ways as possible. So like Nat was saying, cats need a hiding space. Dogs have their own needs as well. So if you can sort of accommodate for as many of them as possible, that would be.
Oh, and then we've got a lovely follow-up question from Indira.
Oh, I like this one.
Which is about the stress that wild animals experience in wildlife rehab centres. And is there ways, again, to reduce the stress during the rehab period? And I'm thinking especially of birds, wildlife, obviously, that's a particular challenge. So, whilst it's stressful enough for animals that are used to being handled, for wildlife that have been found, rescued, or are being relocated and end up in these rehab centres, then there is a specific whole set of knowledge and skills and environments that need to be set up to ensure that those animals are not unduly stressed. The reality is that they will be stressed.
Yeah, I used to work in wildlife rehabilitation, and it was a very difficult job in a lot of ways, because every time you go in to help the animals, you're stressing them out, and they'll never say thank you. They'll never appreciate what you're doing for them. From their perspective, you are some sort of evil captor, and that is very, very stressful. I found it very, very stressful, but also very, very rewarding when you succeed and you have a healthy animal who's able to be released at the end. That's a really rewarding part. So a couple of the things that we did, I worked with the RSPCA. We had a very quiet working environment. There was no radios. There was no, we didn't shout at each other in the corridors. Excuse me, my phone is going.
You're very unprofessional. Do you know that?
Goodness.
Honestly.
This is why we do this on a Friday, not Wednesdays. So sorry. So we had a very quiet environment. We would make sure that you weren't staying in the rooms where the individual animals were kept any longer than necessary, not exposing them to human contact. Particularly, I worked on foxes, particularly orphaned foxes, and you spend very, very little time in these rooms, trying not to in any way influence these animals, frighten these animals, or tame these animals, because particularly foxes are very quick to be tamed, and that doesn't mean domesticated, that just means they lose their fear of humans, which is quite dangerous for a wild animal. They can encroach further on human territories, or get themselves hurt by approaching humans, or hurt humans by approaching humans. So there's lots of individual things you can do, thinking about what is your main goal. Your main goal is to release an animal which is going to be healthy enough to survive in the wild, and to have and to not suffer when you have released it, and to not suffer unduly while it's in the rehabilitation centre. So it's quite complete, and there's lots of research on that.
There is quite a bit of research on this, and I think good wildlife rehabilitation centres do a really good job. But equally, again, I mean, you always get people who go in with the right intent, but perhaps aren't doing such a grand job, and not recognising that they're stressing these animals. Actually, one of the interesting things that I had learned about was the de-oiling of seabirds, because obviously in trying to save seabirds that have unfortunately got caught in an oil slick, many of the welfare charities obviously have to impose a huge amount of stress
they don't like
on those
that
birds.
at all.
And the reality is, for many of those birds, once they're released, no one really knows whether or not they survive.
Yeah.
And it might well be that they don't survive because of the oil and the fact that they've taken in so much oil through preening their feathers. But equally, it might well be that their systems have been completely overtaxed by the stressful experience they've had in being rescued.
Yeah.
So again, that's something that has to be taken on board whenever wildlife rescues are planned.
Yeah.
How do you reduce the stress for those animals? And you know, we could go on and on about this. I mean, if you look at wildlife relocations, translocations, you know, again, you find that the numbers of deaths that happen as a result of myopathy and so on because of stress are far too great, and a lot of this is just by not planning how a particular you know, rescue operation or moving operation takes place.
Yeah.
So the intent might be good, but the actual way of going about it can have very negative consequences for the animals.
I suppose if we had free range to do as many MOOCs as we could, I'd like to do a MOOC on that.
Would you?
Yeah, I think it's a great topic. I love it.
Oh God,
I love to work.
I'm exhausted. I think we need a holiday now. All right then, so let's pick up on a couple of other things that have come up through the main discussion boards. So there was, we said that we would talk about this. There was a very interesting question from Hiroko Yoshida.
Yeah.
And this was about, he?
I'm not sure.
He wondered if this was a suitable place for this question, which was really about the gap caused by cultural differences in understanding of animal welfare. And in this person's country, they felt that change in relation to trying to improve standards and knowledge about animal welfare had been very slow, and would like to have more information about how to proceed with this.
Yeah.
And what do you do about it? And I would say this is right up our street, because this is exactly the challenge that we have when we're working in the Jean Marchik International Centre for Animal Welfare Education. A name of a centre that just trips off your tongue.
Jimmy Call.
The Jimmy Call.
As we sometimes call ourselves. No. Oh, we're not.
But anyway, in the International Centre for Animal Welfare Education, we have set ourselves up to try to we've got quite ambitious goals, but really we are dealing with cultural differences in understanding about animal welfare. And I would say the way that we have tried to overcome this has been to stick with the science side of things. So when we're going and talking to people in the countries that we work in, so Jill mentioned that Taiwan, we have people who we work with in China, India, Vietnam, and various other parts of the world. I think we were in Bangkok recently as well. What we're trying to do is work with a veterinary profession, we work with vet schools and veterinary organisations, and we are trying to help to capacity build and upskill in relation to animal welfare through showing how you can actually integrate animal welfare science into the veterinary curriculum, and how important it is to consider welfare in relation to things that you can measure. and that seems to be much more palatable. It gets away from some of the cultural differences in relation to some particular aspects of welfare. We've seen on the discussion forums huge differences in opinion, huge differences in cultural approach. It's been fascinating for us to watch it because it's like a potted version of what we deal with every day. And the reason that we take the approach that we have, which is to go out there and do education, we happen to be educating a particular group of professionals who we feel are at the front line and need to be much better versed in how they have a role in animal welfare and the sorts of things that they need to know in order to help to improve animal welfare in their own countries. But the reason that we've taken that approach through education and through the scientific approach is because it seems to be easier for us to convince people of the importance of animal welfare. I think the other thing I would say is that there are cultural differences. There are differences in people's history as a culture in relation to their use of animals and their view of animals. And you have to respect that. It might not be the way that we see things, but it is the way that they see things. And if we're going to try and find commonality and move forward, then we need to take into account all views.
Absolutely.
And try to work with those views. And in some places, the economic argument is a much greater driver than it is in other countries, and therefore we will use an economic argument if that is one that makes more sense to that particular culture. And in other countries, it's something else. You know, food safety might be the important thing, or food security might be the important thing. In other countries, it's about public health. And the particular issue that might be doing, the whole One Health agenda. So I think it's about finding the hook very often. It's finding the commonalities. It's finding ways that you can actually make animal welfare important to that particular person that you're talking to. Because we know that animal welfare goes across all sorts of issues to do with human welfare. And so even if, and I know that there was a lovely saying by Marion Stamp Dawkins, who's an animal welfare scientist, and she said, look, it doesn't matter if you have to use a human argument to try to improve things for animals, because at the end of the day, it's the animal that is actually going to benefit from that. So it's not doing the animal down. It's actually still getting to the same goal. It's just speaking a language that makes sense to the people that you're speaking to.
I think one of the things that we do first is we listen to what people in other veterinary schools and other cultures are telling us. What are their specific problems? What are the things that they've tried that have worked? What are the things they've tried that hasn't worked? And there's been a few sort of questions in the forum, such as, how do I convince somebody that animal welfare is important? How do I explain this to family? And I would say your first step is to listen to them, to find out what it is about them that they want to achieve. How can you help them to achieve that, and what will work for them? Listening is very, very important in this role.
Okay, so I hope that's helped to answer that question. It's not one that's easy, and we'd love to hear your ideas actually as well, about how you approach trying to improve things for animals, particularly where you're dealing with cultural in the widest possible sense. It doesn't mean just necessarily different nationalities, but just differences in the way people are coming at things.
And I think we would also quite like to, if you have any success stories, particularly if you've been using the course and you feel the course has helped you, we'd love to know about it. We'd love to do a little bit of blogging about it as well. If you're not following us on Blogger, you should be, and I'll give you a link on Coursera. But do let us know if you have some success stories, and even what hasn't worked, because we're really interested in that.
Well, I think that point about where do we go from now? I know people are very keen to see more of these MOOCs and so on, but the way we see this is the people who are engaged and have really engaged with this course all the way through are now part of our family, and I hope that we will continue to have really fruitful conversations, and that you will follow the blogs that we are putting up about the work that we do overseas. And we look forward to perhaps even meeting you when we are overseas, because we're often in different parts of the world, and it's lovely if we've got people there who actually are as committed as we are. So it's great. We've got a nice question from Jacob. who's the man who likes my voice, which is very nice. And it says here, how from start to finish, approximately how long did it take to create each group of weekly lessons? Oh my God, Jacob, what a good question. We'd love to tell you about this.
A long time.
We started talking about the MOOC and developing the MOOC about a year ago. And within the University of Edinburgh, they're quite strict about who is allowed to go forward to develop these sorts of programs, because at the end of the day, this is a shop window for the University of Edinburgh and SRUC, and you know, we are putting ourselves out there on a forum, you know, that's online, and we don't know who anybody is that's listening in, and we have really no control over that. And so, you know, we have to make sure that within our institutes that the subject matter and the planning of each week and what it is that we're planning to show you is of good quality and credible, and you know, something that our institutions would be proud of. So that sort of process of getting permission to put forward a MOOC and then develop a MOOC, you know, takes a little bit of time and a bit of paperwork, as does most of these things.
Paperwork.
So the second part of it is that once we had been approved as being a MOOC provider for the university and SRUC, we then had to really start to think about how we condensed such an enormous subject that, you know, we spend a year with our students here in Edinburgh if they're on campus full-time, and up to 6 years with students who are part-time running through a master's programme online. How are we going to condense the essential components in order to put something together that was, you know, meaningful and not just too much of a sort of brushstroke, you know, shallow look?
We had two big concerns. Our first concern was that we would provide too much information and it would be useless, or we would provide too little information
and it would be
useless.
Yeah.
And we really wanted to build something that you guys would find value in.
So what we did was we sat down and we scripted up, we planned out learning outcomes, and we scripted up sort of draft outlines of what we thought we could cover each week. And that meant that there were things that we also had to recognise that we felt that we could not cover in good detail and responsibly. And you might notice there's been a lot of discussion about certain things that we didn't cover, and we've tried to explain why that's the case. So one of those would be slaughter. So we ended up with the weekly lessons, and from there we had to engage with a filmmaker, a lovely man called Tim. You've never seen Tim, I don't think, on the screen, because he's always been behind the camera.
Yeah,
maybe once at the beginning.
Twice. Yeah, might be a photo of him somewhere.
So Tim Askew is a great guy who actually has made an awful lot of the movies for all of the University of Edinburgh Coursera MOOCs. And so we sat down with him and we worked through what we wanted to achieve. And we made the decision quite early on that we had looked at other people's MOOCs and we wanted to provide a sort of documentary feel to what we were doing. We obviously work overseas a lot. We had a lot of footage of things that we saw overseas that we wanted to bring into each of the weekly sessions. And we also wanted to try to speak to camera ourselves, which was, you know, something that was a bit new to most of us. Yeah. And we also wanted to get out there and be in the field and show you some of the scenery around Edinburgh, some of the scenery actually around Scotland, because Heather took you up to Aviemore, to the Highland Wildlife Park, and you saw some of the deer up there, and out onto the farms and things. So that was really what took up the time, was actually putting together a schedule that meant that we had a filmmaker, we had interviewers, we had interviewees, we had animals.
Yeah.
And we had space in our diaries, and also we had the weather. That was the other big kind of thing that took up a lot of time, was recognising that in Scotland you can't always rely on the weather.
I do remember when we were filming, I think it was some of the stuff for week 1, and we were desperately trying to get everything done. I think you were doing something to camera, and there was this big sort of storm cloud rolling in. It was getting closer and closer and closer, and we're like, it's not quite right. Can we just do this again really, really quickly?
Yeah, so we were getting a bit wet. And the cameraman was very precious about his camera. So yeah, I mean, it took us probably a lot longer than professional people would take, because we are not professionals. We're professionals hopefully in our own subject area, but not filmmakers. So it took each week's worth of film alone took a lot of time to film. I mean, the actual, once we got down to filming it, on the day, it probably took a couple of days to film each little film that you saw. But the preparation took definitely a good few days.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, we had to then edit this. So that was another little process that we learned about, sitting with our filmmaker, with Tim, and normally one of us who took charge of that particular session would sit down and run through editing it and putting film in where we wanted it, and maybe voiceovers and some of the it's not animation, but some of the
fancy
stuff that went on. We had to actually create that. The spinning brain. I had to go and find a spinning brain, and then Tim did clever things with it. So I mean, it took a long time. And then on top of that, we have these Articulate packages. So these are the interactive packages that Jill has built. And that meant that one of us would work with Jill, or Jill would work on her own to develop up whatever learning materials we wanted for that interactive session. And that's a lot of PowerPoints that then are made into something that is layered and provides you with the interactive experience that you've had. And then we had the quizzes. So that involved another 2 or 3 people. And these are all ex-students of ours who've been on one or other of our master's courses, and those people were employed to help put together the quizzes based on the material that we had provided you with, and then they put those up and ready for you to use. So that took another bit of time. And then they also had to be involved in, or they wanted to be involved in, monitoring the discussion forums. So you've met some of those people because they've answered questions. At the same time, we've also decided that we want to translate a lot of this so that it's more accessible for people who don't have English as their first language. And so we have now engaged a lovely Lisa, who has been busily translating everything into Mandarin.
Yeah.
And we've got somebody else who will be looking at the Spanish version. So yeah, it's been a long, long process, extremely worthwhile from our point of view. We feel very heartened that we've reached as many people as we have, and we're hoping that the second round, which will be in February, will be when we have the Mandarin and the Spanish version available, and we will try to add on a few bits of extra information to try to sort of address some of the things that people were very passionate about, including. So it's been a big thing. I hope that helps you, Jacob. It's been wonderful. It's been a big part of our lives. It's meant most of us haven't had summer holidays yet. It doesn't look like
I don't think you're going to get one, are you?
No, I've got 2 days.
I'm leaving on Friday.
No, I'm not having any. Because we now start teaching master's programs and undergraduates. In fact, our graduate entry program students just arrived 2 weeks ago, and I was teaching them this morning. So it's no rest for the wicked, as they say.
Definitely.
So what else have we got here that we haven't answered, I think?
I'm amazed at how many people are still interested in these Google Hangouts and are still asking questions, because honestly I didn't think they were going to be that popular. Clearly I was very wrong.
Well, it's lovely to have you here, and if you haven't really got any other questions, I think the main thing that we were asked to comment on was just our own experience, our own MOOC experience, and well, I've just told you about how we made the MOOC, and I suppose I'll let Jill have a word about how she's found the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's been very, very rewarding. It's been very exhausting, very stressful at times. I did at one point, quite recently, phone our cameraman in a fit of panic at, I think, 11 o'clock at night or half 11 at night, just to double check that the next week's lectures were definitely the ones that were supposed to go live. At which point he sort of told me, sort of tried to calm me down a little bit and said, yes, don't worry. So yeah, I think because we've had over 33,000 students have actually signed up and I think we've got around about 20,000 people have actually been active, which is really quite high. So most MOOCs don't get more than 5% of students hanging around. We have, you know, by the strictest measure, we've got over 10%. So we're doing really well for what's called retention rate. And I think that's because you guys are really clearly very passionate about this, and this is obviously a subject which is very important. So that part has been quite pressured in a lot of ways because we want to provide something which is valuable enough for you to use. And for me, one of the really great things was when I was reading through some of the thank you threads, which are lovely, are really, really nice to hear, because you know, not a lot of people say thank you, so it's lovely to hear that. But somebody was saying, Jack was saying that she got a job, and she thinks that talking about the MOOC in her interview helped her there, and I was so pleased to hear that. You know, other people have been. I've loved seeing people networking together in the study groups, and people have been making their own little communities. That has just been really rewarding as well. If we can enable people to have these links and these networks, that's something that I'm really proud of. And I think overall, it's just been a hugely rewarding experience. Although I'm very tired, and I'm really looking forward to my holidays.
You deserve it.
Well, you deserve one as well. You should take one.
And I think that I will. Oh gosh, isn't that fantastic, Lana? Sitting in Zimbabwe. In fact, I did spend some beautiful time in Zimbabwe, doing some research there on animal welfare. Actually, quite some years ago, and what a fantastic place it is. I feel that our whole team has benefited hugely from this. It has been a lot of work, and I'm glad it's been useful. And I have to be honest, it's been wonderful hearing positive things. A little bit disheartening at times when we hear negative things, but as Jill has reminded me, and has even given me a little sort of you know, printout, that we are very good at concentrating on the one or two negative things, and not always celebrating the really positive aspects and the positive feedback that we've had. So apart from some of the things that didn't work for people, I think on the whole, all of us have found this to be a very positive experience, and wonderful engagement. I cannot believe how engaged people have been with these discussion forums. Fantastic. And you know, even just recently we were down in London at a meeting, and I was over in Denmark at some other meeting, and people coming up to you and saying, you know, it's been great, I've been on your MOOC and I've learned this, and you know, it's great because I've actually connected with people. You know, that has been fabulous, just knowing that people are out there and watching it and finding it useful. The other big plus for me are the study groups. You know, the kids study group, the study groups in different parts of the world. I really, really hope that people keep that going, and that they found people to connect with, that they can keep having discussions with. And what will be really great is if we see you back again in February, even if you don't want to go through the whole watching our videos again, because we're not going to get around to completely revamping everything. We haven't got time, nor do we have finances to do that. But having you on the discussion boards and talking about how you have changed things, or changed your thinking, or changed your careers as a result, partially, of being involved with this MOOC, is going to be something I'm going to really, really look forward to. So I think at the moment I would say that our team here in Edinburgh would like to say farewell, and hopefully that we will meet some of you when we're out and about, and just, you know, keep being passionate about animal welfare, keep thinking about animal welfare as being something that you need to find evidence for, if you're going to really convince the people that need to be convinced. So bye-bye, and thank you very much.
And just remember to stay in touch with us, follow our blog, follow us on Twitter, and you're part of the family now, so stick with us.
Bye.
Bye.